Data centers and the future of power in the United States. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.
All right, so everything we're talking about and hearing about in the news right now is about data centers and how they're going to be taking over all of our load all over the place. So I think we're going to try to unpack that today, right, Dan?
We sure are, and for good reason, because it is certainly a big issue.
Yeah. So first of all, let's get some statistics down, right? So the data center boom is creating data centers and AI, or artificial intelligence, is creating a huge increase in demand for electricity. It's doubling today's data center energy use by 2030 because it's used for cooling, IT, lighting, offices, security systems. And there's a lot of uncertainty around the precise pace of power demand from data centers and the grid resources that are needed to cover the demand and the capabilities of large-scale on-site power alternatives. If you look at the S&P Global recent report that came out, it's showing that data centers will require 22% more grid power by the end of 2025 than they did in 2024, and will need nearly 3 times as much in 2030. And we'll post that link on energymatters.world along with all of our other links. So Dan, give us a little bit of background about what's going on with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and FERC right now, and how that's being impacted, or how that is impacting, I suppose, energy demand and AI.
So I guess the starting point would be that data centers are seen generally as a good thing in terms of our technology base. We need them to do all these various things, all the AI devices, all the queries, all of the things that we use to power our lives, and then some questionable things, Bitcoin mining, all various other things are using them as well. So there are good and bad seen uses of this energy. The direct impact, though, is that according to some recent studies, one by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, one by Bloomberg Associates, is that there are places where the cost of energy has risen by over 250% over the last 5 years. So there are some places that are really seeing spikes in price. And big data centers, the one you see on the news, it kind of looks like a massive flat building, a server farm, kind of a mall on steroids, but just housing computers. Some of those are equivalent to about 100,000 households of demand. And
wow. And how many acres is that?
So there are several acres in area. They can be kind of 5, 10 acre buildings. I mean, it's some of the buildings are like a mall. So you asked the question about FERC. And I guess one of the points there is that there's an immediate story. How does energy get generated to power these data centers? Is it in competition with your own your home energy use? And then there's a broader backstory that we won't get into in today's episode, but we want to sort of highlight it. And that is that decisions to expand transmission capacity or other things that could help to solve some of these crises are in part at the regional level in front of the public utility commissions. But the big issue behind the stage is that these will ultimately also go to the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so there's a complex dance. And if nothing about our Utility and Energy Matters series is that is always this is a more complex issue than just, do you like solar? Do you dislike data centers? Do you like nuclear? Whatever else. And that's what the backstory is here. But we're going to save the regulation and the FERC issue for a later episode when we have a representative on, so we get a couple different sides.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and I know we've been talking about the fact that Energy Matters is focused on the science and business of energy, but of course, the science and business of energy are impacted by policy. So the Department of Energy in early November of 25 issued a directive to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to rapidly accelerate data center and large load interconnections, to make it easier for large loads, and they're defining that by over 20 megawatts, which is, again, a huge load, including hybrid facilities that share a point of interconnection with new or existing generation resources. And so what FERC is doing, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is being required to do by the Department of Energy, is allow these data centers to get online onto the utility lines quicker and quicker, and not have to do all of the rigmarole that a lot of wind and solar and other generation sources are needing to do, right?
And I think that's one of the points where you kind of want to if you're listening, take a thought because data centers are powered by whatever energy is available. Right now, about a quarter of their supply comes from natural gas, fossil gas. A little less than that comes from renewables. Some comes from nuclear and hydro. But it's really this kind of interaction of new gas supplies needed and data centers that, at least for me, has me most concerned. Because if we grow the amount of renewables as a push to supply data centers, there's kind of a positive interaction in terms of being a smarter, more data interconnected economy and also ramping up the amount of renewables that we have a demand for. That's good. One of the issues, though, is that data centers also use a huge amount of water for cooling. And so
Right.
there's it's kind of scary numbers. 17 billion gallons of water in 2023, projected to more than double. So pushing to have renewables power data centers could be a good thing as long as whether the data center provider or the regulator does what is being kind of informally called bring your own generation. So if you're going to build a new data center, you should be part of the effort to build out new supply. And if that new supply is renewables, there's some positive synergies there. Now, I think one other fact just to put on the table is as of today, data centers are clustered in three areas. Virginia is the data center corridor of the United States. They have more than twice as many as the nearest competitor, which is Texas, and then California. And those three really dominate where they are. And so you have to think about the regional aspects of this story as well.
Now, why on earth, as a data center, would you want to build in California where costs of work are higher, utility rates are 4 times what they are in other parts of the country? Why would you do that in California?
Well, so I think there's a couple reasons. One is that there's a huge demand to be served in terms of the tech community, not just Silicon Valley, but the tech corridors in Southern California. The other side is that California is already getting just about 70% of its energy from renewables. And actually, that energy is lower cost than the fossil energy. So there's a potential kind of positive spiral, a good feedback loop where to meet the growing demand for data centers, California builds more clean energy, which boosts the overall clean energy in the economy. And this is the big if, which we have not seen yet, and if those build outs are done in a way that support community energy, not essentially taking from stealing or just driving the rates up for local consumers because of not the cost of clean energy, but all the other issues, the interconnection, the transmission, and all that kind of stuff. So there could be a virtuous spiral here, but so far, no surprise, we are not seeing that.
Right. And I think to unfortunately go back to policy for a moment, I was just listening to Chris Wright, who is running the Department of Energy right now. He's the 17th secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy, and he's a self-described entrepreneur. Tell me, Dan, how did he make all of his money?
So Chris Wright is a oil and gas man. He does have a geothermal business on the side, but
Yes.
largely he is part of the Colorado fracking gas boom. So
Right.
he has a very pro fossil gas, as does this administration, and kind of even more worrying to me, it's not just that there's a policy of all of the above, meaning we support all forms of energy. This administration is also dramatically slashing all funds for renewables, in particular wind, but really all of them. And so we're not seeing an all of the above strategy, which is not what I'd like to see, but it would be the baseline. What we're seeing here is a fossil above strategy. The so called energy dominance from the Trump administration is really all about going backwards to fossil fuels. And with the COP or Conference of the Parties 30 meeting in Brazil taking place in November 2025, what we're seeing is one world leader after another basically stand up and condemn the US's backwards looking view on energy, fighting for fossil when in fact at minimum an all of the above, but really a green and the above would be the way to go by most world leaders.
And I'm going to have to tease you for just
But
a
back to
moment
data centers.
because Chris Wright did some graduate work in electrical engineering at UC Berkeley, at your institution.
He did indeed. And many people of all kinds of different political persuasions have been at UC Berkeley. So despite the view that it's only for liberals, that is not true.
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of given everybody a background on data centers and the fact that demand is increasing dramatically. And we've talked in former episodes about how the transmission and distribution grid has not been well maintained. Now, the question is, what are we going to do? And there are a couple solutions for that. So as you've already noted, more natural gas, more fracking. Chris Wright can make more money while he's running the Department of Energy, and all of these other people can do so as well. We could also use nuclear, and I want to put a pin in that. But I think there's two other things that are interesting that I want to start with. One is just completely generating your own electricity behind the meter and not needing to use the transmission and distribution grid at all. So there's news now about using old 747 motors to power data centers. Tell me a little bit about that, Dan.
So there's a couple of features here, and I can't leave the nuclear one out, but we'll do the 747 engine story because it turns out the most efficient gas engine that we have in the world today is actually one of these Pratt and Whitney or Rolls-Royce engines that are used in big intercontinental planes. And actually, they're quite large. They can be up to 70 megawatts in peak capacity. Now, you don't run it at peak the whole time when you're flying your intercontinental flight. They've throttled back away. But what it means is that those engines, if you're going to burn gas, are a pretty efficient way to do so. Some of us, myself included, think we could be doing even better by powering with wind and solar. But if we look at what's going on today in the country, those big jet engines are actually about the most efficient means we have today to burn gas in a steady way to power data centers. And one feature of data centers we didn't highlight before is that while the demand in your home or your business kind of goes up and down, your home part of the day, your away part of the day, hopefully you're asleep, etc., data centers can run 24/7. And so their demand can be high all the time, not only for electricity, but also for water. And so while these jet engines repurposed to power data centers are fine, what I would, of course, like to see is bring your own generation if you want to open up a new data center, but bring your own green generation. And with the cost profile of renewables compared to gas, it seems like someone with shall we say, a West Coast or a California mindset to be a good deal, but that's not what's happening. And certainly in the big corridors in Texas and in Virginia, we are seeing new gas generation being brought on board, although companies like Google and others have said they are going to invest heavily in nuclear. So they would be bringing their own generation,
Right.
but that generation is years off. And
Right,
so
because there's so many permits that are required.
right.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
huge demand for energy now for this. And so loading up data center power supply with gas now, it's not quite clear, are they going to really be able to are they going to make good on this switch to move over to clean energy later on?
So, there's lots of companies, including Facebook, that are taking on a huge amount of debt in order to invest in these data centers. So, I mean, is there a big bubble or not? We're not the people that are giving financial advice. We're energy nerds. But, interesting to think through how all of these things are happening. The other thing, and I know that you're dying to talk about nuclear, but I'm interested in two specific things. One, in order to install solar anywhere, you need to go through an interconnection process, and wind, you need to go through an interconnection process, which could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years at this point, depending on the utility that you're dealing with. If you just generate your own electricity behind your meter, the utility doesn't need to do anything, right? They're not involved at all. You're reducing the load that you're pulling from the utility and generating your own electricity. And so that, to me, is very interesting, Dan, because does that obviate at some point the need for utilities? Have we outgrown utilities?
Well, I don't think it obviates the need for utilities, but I think that the concept is right. I mean, I think that what you could get here is a forward-thinking, I'll call it a progressive company that wants to build its data center, bring its own generation, could actually then also become a merchant plant supplying power, ideally green power in my view, but they could be building more than they need and providing power into the grid as well as powering their own facilities. So there is a upcycle here that would be beneficial because some of these data centers, like those in Virginia, are very near population centers. So there is a ready-made demand for that power if they wanted to kind of play this data center plus progressive path, which to me does not involve gas. But it certainly could involve data center operators also getting into the power generation business. And that would be very interesting to me.
Right. I think, and that was the exact next thing I wanted to talk about, which is about sensorizing large loads. Basically, thinking through grid enhancing technologies like, you know, to create flexible load, right? So and really it could be as easy as just turning off and turning back on your electricity. So, in Virginia, I'm making this up, but, between 5 and 7 p.m. on August 22nd is going to be the peak load for the entire year. And you pay a data center money just to reduce its load by 25%.
And those are not at all uncommon agreements. Lots
Right.
of large consumers already do get a better rate on their utility bill if they agree to be flexible when the RTO, when the regional transmission authority needs them to be. And so this is not a big stretch. This is not some unusual thing that would be difficult to do, but it would be one that would be particularly beneficial in these high congestion areas where building new transmission is going to take some time. And so I actually see there's an upside. I don't think there's an upside to the water demand for the air conditioning that we're seeing in data centers today, but I do think that there could be a positive energy path if data center operators want to work with the FERC and with their regional regulators to make it happen. We have not seen that yet, I would argue, although we are seeing this discussion that, yeah, we'll bring on new generation. And again, nuclear has come up a lot. We've already seen two facilities, one, the ominous 3 Mile Island, and the Duane Arnold nuclear plants in Iowa, both being repurposed to be energy largely for data centers. So there is some starting grounds on this, and depending what you think about nuclear, that may or may not make you feel comfortable, but it is
Right.
happening.
It is happening. Yeah. I mean, I think, this whole grid operators and what are they going to do with this new requirement with data center operators? I mean, if you can actually surface at real usage patterns instead of assuming constant max load and design and respond to dispatch signals for fast response and detect voltage issues before they become harmonic issues, this is a big problem that's being solved, as written by my friend Melissa Chan at Analog Devices. And she wrote a post recently about the fact that we're not just trying to replace grid enhancing technologies or avoid transmission build out altogether, but it's about bridging the gap with intelligence while those upgrades are underway. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and that's a really exciting thing to do because we already know from the simple Nest thermostats that you can program to do things to more advanced versions that you can easily program your system. I have solar and batteries at home, and I am certainly fully ready to respond to price signals from my utility, cut back what I'm doing, and be able to sell more power in. And in fact, several states, California, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Virginia, have all looking at bills that would require or incentivize data centers to not only draw power from renewables, but also to be engaged to what you're describing, which is basically using the demand of data centers to help expand the use of smart grid technology.
Absolutely. And that's including Maryland. So in Maryland today, you can go through the peak rewards program of Baltimore Gas and Electric. And basically, what you give the utility the right to turn down or even turn off your air conditioning during the few peak hours of the day in the summer when the electricity is most needed.
And I think the kind of the fun feature here is that, and maybe this is our kind of closing bit on data centers, but it does highlight the overall story that the challenge for utilities, for grid operators, is that your revenue is really based around your average demand, but your costs are based on meeting those peaks and those times of brownouts and blackouts. And if more smart circuits, more smart consumers, more smart regulators can be the norm, this is actually a way to upgrade the hardware and the grid, which everyone knows is decades out of date. And so this could be a race to not only provide more, I'm going to put in parentheses, clean energy, but more
Right.
energy, and do so in a way we're also investing in making the grid smarter, more reliable, and more responsive so that we can send power where it's needed to power low income communities, to power areas that are being hit by blizzards and storms. So we are not there yet in terms of an upside of this huge upsurge in demand. What we're still seeing is mainly the rates for individuals going up with no benefit to them because they're essentially subsidizing data centers by their costs go up, and then that money is going into to really upgrade the grid so that data centers can receive the power that they are so hungry for.
Yep, absolutely. Now, I do want to make sure you have your time in the sun to talk a little bit about nuclear power. So I know you are a huge nuclear supporter. So tell us how nuclear is going to solve some of this problem.
I don't know how you know that, Claire, since that is not true. I am certainly not a big supporter of nuclear as it exists today, so appreciate the sarcastic lead in. Um, so it's hard to think of a technology so far in the US that we have built more expensively, more over budget, and more behind schedule than nuclear.
Right.
Arguably, nuclear and transmission are the two that we are worst at doing. And so, as connected to the episode we did on nuclear, the fact that we're seeing a lot of the big Silicon Valley type companies saying that they are going to invest in nuclear as part of their approach to powering these data centers, I do have some significant worries here that those nuclear plants are not going to come online until sometime in the 2030s because the first new pilot nuclear plants are not going to be online until the end of this decade. And so until those so-called small modular nuclear plants get tested at national laboratories, at Idaho National Lab and elsewhere, and then eventually percolate into the wider economy, this promise of a nuclear could do, with all my concerns about cost and management being just a footnote, it's not clear to me that we're going to do this in a way that we get smarter about the grid, smarter about utility bills for people, and smarter about nuclear, which I would say has been just an ongoing problem. So I see a number of worries built up here, but it is certainly the narrative that a lot of the big data center companies are saying they're going to be elements of building out new generation with nuclear. So I guess for me, my closing point on this would really be my worry is not which technology we do it down the road. It's that right now we're seeing dramatic price increases for ratepayers as a result of this kind of unregulated push into the data center space. To me, that goes against every planning issue around financial and environmental justice that we could do. So I worry that the short-term picture is going to dominate what we do in the longer term around data centers.
Yep. And I think my closing point would simply be that data center industry needs to embrace flexibility as part of the solution. And we'll post another article that was written by Tyler Norris, a doctoral student at Duke University, about the exact same from the New York Times, that they just need to enhance flexibility in order to support the growth of the industry altogether.
That's right. So let's hope that this gets us started in a conversation. We'll certainly come back to data centers later on Energy Matters.
So tons more to discuss about the data center issue and the fact that energy prices are going to be increasing for at least the short term due to data centers and the huge increase in demand. But stay tuned. There's lots more to discuss. So thank you very much for joining us at Energy Matters. And you can check out all of the articles that we've referenced at energymatters.world. Thanks very much for joining. This is Claire.
And Dan.